Joining us now from the UK is writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue. Esther Krakue, thank you so much for your time. The UK, well, the government is in crisis at the moment. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's leadership is hanging on by a thread over his decision to appoint Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the US despite his friendship with convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. He was sacked as ambassador last year over the friendship, but right now plenty of questions are being raised following the recent release of the Epstein files that suggests that Peter Mandelson received money from Jeffrey Epstein and allegedly forwarded an economic briefing to Epstein while he was the business secretary back in 2009. Bring us up to speed on all of this and the latest from the UK.
So today, during Prime Minister's Question Times, Keir Starmer was forced to admit that he actually did know about Peter Mandelson's association with Jeffrey Epstein in a security briefing. So he was asked point blank in the dispatch box whether he actually knew during the vetting process, which Keir Starmer actually even celebrated Peter Mandelson coming on board before the vetting was complete. So he'd already made his mind up that this man was going to be the US ambassador. And then in sort of an embarrassing U-turn, he now had to reveal that he did know, but that Peter Mandelson misled him and his team on the extent of the relationship, which, again, is quite baffling because this was easily Googleable information. I mean, if a conservative researcher who's about 20 years old can find this on the internet, then the Labour vetting team should have been able to. But it's more about why he even brought him back in the first place. Peter Mandelson had to resign twice in disgrace from government back in 1998 and 2001, one of which was because he basically peddled his influence to get an Indian billionaire a British passport. So this is not someone who had a clean track record to begin with. But it's clear that Labour is so bereft of talent that they had to bring someone whose nickname is, I kid you not, the Prince of Darkness, into the Labour sort of high office to try and get anything done. Unfortunately, even during Peter Mandelson's brief stint as US ambassador, no one knew his name because basically Nigel Farage was our de facto ambassador, and he actually peddled more influence with the Americans than Peter Mandelson did. But his association with Jeffrey Epstein has proven to be extremely ugly. He called, Jeffrey Epstein being released from prison Liberation Day. The email exchanges between the two suggest that, Peter Mandelson was happy to use his influence to try and influence bankers' bonuses during the financial crisis, the sale of a bank, and details about a European bank bailout. This is at a time where, governments were really scrambling to try and reassure people. People were losing their jobs left, right, and center, their homes. And you had basically what was effectively the deputy prime minister at the time using his influence to get a pedophile financier and his friends whatever scraps they could. So this is what happens when you resurrect the carcasses of a man like Peter Mandelson's political career. And unfortunately, Keir Starmer is really going to try hard to ride this wave, but I don't think he'll be successful.
It'll be interesting to see if he can survive this. He's certainly in a lot of trouble over this. And he's also, Keir Starmer that is, he could be facing a revolt from his own MPs. This is over something entirely different. This is over plans to house asylum seekers in newly built council homes. These include local areas such as Brighton and Hackney, and several Labor MPs are now pressuring the Prime Minister not to go ahead with this plan, Esther.
Yes, I mean, the government has denied that this new accommodation will be used to house asylum seekers. And we know that council housing is in very short supply in England. 1 in 5 people actually lives in a council home in the UK or in England. But the problem is Keir Starmer is like the king of U-turns. I mean, to date, he has, I think, about 15 U-turns that his government has done. So the problem is in the fact that he's denying that any of this accommodation will go to asylum seekers. Is the fact that it's very plausible. And one underhanded way that the government is trying to get around housing asylum seekers is using HMOs, which is basically multiple occupancy homes, on people's streets. So not isolated in hotels or in army barracks. I mean, just the kind of run-of-the-mill house that you wouldn't suspect next to a school or a hospital is being used to house often what is like dozens of men that have just arrived into the country illegally via a small boat. And this is one of the things that we saw kick off the riots last summer with the Epping Bell Hotel, where a man who'd arrived by a boat earlier, I think 2 weeks earlier, had been charged with sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl in that town. So I think the big problem for Keir Starmer is not what he's saying. It's the fact that he's lost all credibility, that his own MPs just don't believe him.
He absolutely has. Let's look at the polls. First, before we get to Keir Starmer, let's talk about Reform and how it's doing in the polls. A recent Ipsos political monitor found that Reform UK maintains an 8-point lead over Labor, but this is down from November last year. And Labor continue to lose their 2024 voters to a mix of parties. And on Keir Starmer, only 15% are satisfied with the way that Keir Starmer is doing his job as Prime Minister. Now, I think that comes as a shock to absolutely no one. I mean, the fact that there is 15% is the shocking part in this, Esther. What do you make of what the polls are saying? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Conservative Party has been gaining ground as Kemi Badenoch has, had her profile risen, particularly over this Epstein scandal, which is quite the natural to and fro of government. But I think if you poll people again this week, it's probably going to swing back to Reform, especially after the high-profile defections that we've seen with Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick, who seem to be Conservatives that are more have more in common with Reform than with the Conservative Party. They tend to be more hardline Conservatives. As for the Labour Party, I think they can see that the writing is on the wall. The big test actually now is the May 7th local council elections, because the Labour Party is really expecting a complete bloodbath. And if anyone had to put their money on when Keir Starmer's premiership, it would probably be completely toast. It would be after the May 7th local council elections, particularly in Wales and Scotland, where the Labour Party is predicted to get completely thrashed.
Okay, well, Esther, I want to ask you how safe London is at the moment, because according to some media outlets, we're being told, don't believe the violent videos that we're seeing all the time online, don't believe the high crime rates, and don't believe the huge number of people who are packing up their bags and fleeing London. According to The Economist, London is far safer than violent viral videos will have you believe. It's interesting being here in Sydney, Australia, reading that, and then at the same time also seeing news articles that people like Tom Cruise, they're packing up, they're fleeing London. Tom Cruise is leaving his London apartment reportedly just after a shop near him was robbed, Esther.
Yes, I mean, what they're basically saying is close one eye and squint the other, and then put on sunglasses, and then you can pretend that London is what it is. I mean, other than from personal experience, having my friend's phone stolen on Oxford Street only a few months ago, seeing people literally being questioned by the police randomly as I was taking a walk with my friend in Knightsbridge, because some armed robbers decided to smash up, I think it was a Chanel shop, and steal whatever they could get their hands on, and the police decided to question me because I look like an armed robber apparently. Look, the reality is the kinds of people that come up with these sorts of statements do not live in London, or live in such a leafy part of London that actually when they call the police, they turn up. If you go outside of, even outside of sort of the central areas, the data is very clear, and it's very hard to mask it in any other way. The fact is, knife crime is up. It's been up by over 50% since Keir Starmer, since Sadiq Khan became London mayor. Phone thefts are through the roof, to the point where the police are not even doing anything about it. They take a crime reference number for insurance purposes and then get you on your merry way. Sexual assault, I mean, there's, I believe, a rape every few hours in London. And that's something that the Metropolitan Police, again, can't talk away or try to say, oh, but it's not that bad, because, rape is never that bad, or some sort of ridiculous excuse that they could come up with. The reality is London is deteriorating fast. The number of non-doms that you see leaving London isn't just because of the Chancellor's poor tax plans. It's because why would you, a wealthy person, live in a major city where you're not safe? You can't wear any of your luxury jewelry. A man was stabbed to death last year for his Rolex watch. A man and a father of two who just visited London with his children. I mean, where is the room to hide and to paint the picture as something that it's not? So this is the kind of things that infuriates people, because they just think that the electorate is so adrift from the people that are actually running the country, and these are the kinds of things that radicalize them.
It's just so sad. It is so shocking. And then it's kind of infuriating reading pieces like that in the media where they're just pretending what is happening in London, it just does not exist. I want to talk to you about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and the Epstein files. Of course, the newly released Epstein files has just raised more questions around Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. Skynews.com.au is reporting that King Charles is furious with Keir Starmer after Keir Starmer joined calls for Andrew to testify to Congress. Look, the Andrew allegations are incredibly damaging to the royal family. They are. But Keir Starmer, I suppose he's really put in his place when you look at the pecking order of importance in the UK. Esther, what do you make of this story?
I mean, he made a statement about Prince Andrew having to go to the US to testify before Congress, just as he was getting off a plane from China. So his excuse is that he's been insulated for the last 4 days. Remember his trip to China, this country that we should be having closer ties with, that he trusts so much. Him and his entire team had to take burner phones and
Mm.
laptops because they were scared of being spied upon. But he made this remark that infuriated the king off the cuff because he hadn't actually consulted the palace. And while the Buckingham Palace has tried to do what it can do to minimize the furore around Prince Andrew and his association, or the prince formerly known as Andrew, and his association with Jeffrey Epstein, this has been very much a coordinated effort between Buckingham Palace and number 10 Downing Street. And so for Keir Starmer to go off the record and say, Prince Andrew should go to the US to testify before Congress. Well, first of all, he can't be compelled to do so, which is actually what Keir Starmer said a few months before. And secondly, it's completely inappropriate for him to do that and to basically take a decision on behalf of the royal family without the king's explicit permission. You have to remember that it's King Charles that basically saved his relationship with Donald Trump. Without the royal family, Donald Trump doesn't have time for Keir Starmer, and certainly not Peter Mandelson, who was not highly regarded amongst sort of Republican top brass. So this is something that he will regret, and I'm sure the king will take him to task on that. But just even raising that and giving it life and having Lib Dem politicians say, yes, actually, he should go to America, is going to put a lot of pressure on Buckingham Palace that they really don't need at the moment. Already, they had to smuggle Prince Andrew out of his home under the cover of darkness because they're so embarrassed by him. I'm sure at some point they'll say they're going to ship him to a village in India or something just to really get rid of him. But it's not helpful for the royal family to have these interventions by a prime minister who's basically a dead man walking.
Well, finally, I have to talk to you about the Beckhams. It appears an Oprah Winfrey sit-down interview could possibly be on the cards for Brooklyn Beckham, following reports that Meghan Markle has been offering herself as a mentor following this family breakup bombshell. The 26-year-old has apparently been receiving support from the Duchess of Sussex since he posted on Instagram about his family and the breakdown. Esther, is this a good idea for Brooklyn Beckham to be getting advice from Meghan Markle?
Well, obviously not. And, usually these kinds of kind of insider scoops are usually quite dubious at the best of times. However, there is a form for this to actually have some credibility. We do remember that the Beckhams were actually at Prince Harry and Meghan's wedding. They grew closer to the couple after they were married because of David Beckham's kind of acquaintance with Prince Harry, that when he used to run into him during sort of royal engagements and all of that, but it wasn't really a close friendship. And then we find out a few years later that the couple had fallen out, allegedly because the Sussexes didn't trust the Beckhams and they felt like they were the source of leaks about their private lives, so they cut off that relationship. There is some form that Meghan Markle might see herself in Brooklyn Beckham, with the slight exception that her parents are not bazillionaires and that her mother was not a Spice Girl. But I'm sure that makes no difference to Meghan Markle. Obviously, it would be a mistake for Brooklyn Beckham to entertain any more media around his family, especially because the Beckhams are not amateurs. They're not like the royal family that will say recollections may vary and just keep a dignified silence about this. The Beckhams are very, very well seasoned media operators, and if they have to go against their own son, they will. Because in as much as he's complaining about his family and the fact that they're trying to control him, they are the reason why he's able to live a life to the tunes of hundreds of millions of pounds, and his wife apparently is worth $1 billion and gets a stipend of $1 million as an allowance from her father. So, there's a lot to remember there. The Beckhams are not the royal family, and they will do what they need to do to protect their own.
Writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue, thank you so much for joining us. Wonderful to speak with you.
Thank you.